The bitter wind sliced through the narrow alleyways beneath the mortal city like cold steel, carving shadows deeper into the crumbling stone and faded grime of forgotten tunnel. Above her, the murmur of distant footsteps echoed faintly, a reminder that life pulsed just out of reach, safely ensconced in the luxuries and lies of the city above. But for Leora, the world she once called home had vanished beneath the weight of a single shattered truth. She was cursed. Branded by the very clan who had raised her, she was cast into the deadly wilds below, exiled without ceremony or mercy. Her slender form shivered, wrapped in a ragged cloak that did little against the chill. She swallowed back a ragged breath, feeling the raw ache in her limbs more fiercely than the cold. Her emerald eyes, sharp and fierce despite their weariness, scanned the darkness with a cautious intensity, every nerve stretched taut by the deafening silence and unseen threats that stalked these forsaken tunnels. It was an environment that would have broken most, flesh torn, spirit shattered. Yet Leora clung to something deeper, something unyielding beneath the surface of pain. Night was thick around her, harboring dangers no mortal should face alone, claws that scraped too close, silent eyes observing from the edges of her fragile firelight. She could not see them, but she felt their hunger, like an electric pulse along her skin. The predators were real, sharp-toothed, quick-moving, and she remained motionless, heart thunderous in her chest, until inevitably they slinked away, deterred by some invisible boundary she dared not fully understand. Not yet. A low growl, a sound deeper than any beast's, resonated through the suffocating shadows, something primal and vast. It pressed against the wild night like a pulse, a rhythm she recognized not from nature but from legend, the Alpha King's beast, her breath hitched, muscles coiling with a mixture of fear and fascination. Why had this creature lurked so close, wandering the paths where no man dared tread, and why did it not strike, not tear her apart like the others? There was power beneath her skin, ancient and raw, awakening in tandem with the beast's stirring, but she dared not name it aloud, nor allow herself hope. Hope was what had undone her clan, what marked her as unnatural and dangerous. The sunlight had sullied their eyes. The darkness whispered truths they could not bear. She curled into a quiet defiance, allowing a small, stubborn flame to grow inside. Even now, cast out and hunted, she was unbroken. The shadows listened, and somewhere, far away, the Alpha King waited. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The cavernous expanse of the shadow court swallowed the dim light of the torch-bearers, the air thick with a mingling of damp stone. Here, beneath the city's heartbeat, a kingdom ruled not by law, but by raw power and unspoken vows, held in the iron grip of its ruler, Kaelan, the Alpha King. Rumors swirled about him like smoke. A man carved from storm and shadow, merciless as the beasts he commanded, yet bound by a secret that carved fissures in his formidable armor. Leora was dragged forward, a reluctant figure ensnared in the grip of the king's sentinels. Her slender wrists bore new wounds from their harsh hands, but her gaze, resilient and unbowed, flicked defiantly over the wide expanse of the court. Every muscle in her body screamed to flee, yet no escape awaited beneath the cold stone vaults of this forbidden sanctum. Her exile had only deepened. Thrust from one prison into another, Kaelan's eyes found her before anyone else's did. They were piercing, ice-blue, and unyielding, like glaciers carved into a living storm. His thick, raven-black hair framed a face both regal and ruthless, a faint scar tracing the arch of his left brow, the only evidence of scars that ran far deeper, invisible but etched into his spirit. Even in stillness, his presence dominated the space between them, as if the shadows themselves knelt in deference. Lyra's heart hammered, a drumbeat of defiance and despair, but her voice caught in the cold vault of her throat. She wouldn't beg, she wouldn't plead for these strangers who regarded her like a plague, whispers haunting her every step. "Who is she?" A low voice, edged with suspicion and simmering tension. "That girl." "The cursed one, cast out by her own tribe," another said, the atmosphere thickening with suspicion. "How does she breathe beneath the city's pulse?" "The wild devoured them before, because she is not what they claimed." That truth unsettled the space between shadowed eyes. Leora's subtle power pulsed beneath her skin again, a faint gleam impossible to conceal. It radiated, drawing the attention of beast and man alike, a quiet intensity that stirred something ancient in the Alpha King's cold countenance. Kaelin stepped forward, the vast hall seeming to shrink before his towering frame. Leora lifted her chin, unwilling to bow, unwilling to yield, despite the weight that bore down with every heartbeat. "You will answer for this intrusion." Kaelin's voice was low, yet every syllable cut like a sharpened blade. "Why is it that your presence awakens the beast, that even my fiercest warriors dare not approach?" Flinching, steady and deliberate. "Because I am not a curse, and I am not prey." The court fell into a charged silence before a murmur rippled among the crowd. Kaelin's beast, a dark force breathing beneath the surface of his control, growled, lowly, restless, agitated by the faint flare of her power. The flicker of something unreadable crossed Kaelin's features. Curiosity mingled with something raw hunger. Caution, perhaps a threadbare hope. "You have fire," he admitted, voice lowering. "Less a threat now, more an acknowledgement. Let alone provoke the shadows to stir with their presence." Leora swallowed down the ache in her chest. "I survived because I had to." Kaelin studied her with slow intensity, a tension stretching between them like a thin wire, ready to snap or bind. His pack surrounded her with wary eyes and grinding teeth. Still, she did not waver. When a shot of cold rage flickered in the eyes of one of his warriors, branding her a threat solely for her defiance, Kaelin's hand shot out, silencing the man with a wordless command. Then, unexpectedly, Leora reached out, lifting a trembling hand toward the Alpha King's arm, as if drawn by something beyond fear or reason. The touch was brief but steady, a quiet courage and a shield against the hostility that thickened the air. The wild beast that had lurked in the shadow seemed to exhale a deep breath of relief, collapsing back into the recesses of Kaelin's soul in response. Something shifted, just barely, but undeniably. Kaelin's eyes narrowed, the glint of a truce forming in that charged silence between predator and prey, king and exile. "Perhaps," he murmured with reluctant approval. "There is more to you than any of us dared to see." Leora met his gaze then with a flicker of a weary smile, fragile yet fierce. The seedling of trust, buried beneath layers of betrayals and hardened pride. For the first time, beneath the weight of shadow and exile, two broken souls began to recognize the possibility of something more, a bond forged not in submission or conquest, but in the raw power of being truly seen. And in that tenuous moment, amidst the cold stone and whispered dangers, the Alpha King and the quiet defiant Waitress took the first tentative step toward a destiny neither could have imagined, one born of flame, shadow, and shattered truths. The chamber was colder than she expected, not in temperature, but in the weight of watchful eyes that tracked her every step as she was led deeper into Kaelin's fortress. The cavernous halls swallowed her soft footfalls. Torches flickered along the walls, casting cruel shadows that seemed to reach for her, as if to remind her she was an outsider, an exile whose very presence unsettled the brittle peace here. Her fingers curled tightly into the folds of her cloak, the worn fabric a faint comfort against the prickling awareness that she was under constant scrutiny. Thrown into the king's inner circle like a piece on a dark chessboard, Leora knew that every whispered word behind closed doors, every sidelong glance, was a thread in a web she had yet to understand. The lords and ladies of the Shadow Court regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and thinly veiled curiosity. None dared approach her closely, and for many she might as well have been a ghost haunting the stone, untouchable but vulnerable all the same. Yet despite the unease radiating from those around her, it was Kaelin's presence, the relentless gravity of the Alpha King, that warped the very air she breathed. The beat of the beast beneath his skin was a low, feral murmur she felt in her bones, in the tightening of her heart, in the almost imperceptible thrill that raced along her veins whenever she crossed his path. There was something about this proximity that stirred a wild warmth beneath her own guarded skin, something dangerous and tethered to the essence of her gift. She had always known deep down that her healing touch was no ordinary mercy. It was a whisper of the forbidden, a surge of power they had called a curse. But here, when her fingertips met the bruised and battered flesh of one of Kaelin's trusted guards after a skirmish in the outer courtyard, that power surged beyond what she dared imagine. The guard's pain ebbed away under her touch, the ragged edges of wounds knitting together as if her hands sang a secret lullaby only the broken could hear. His eyes widened, reflecting awe and disbelief. "How?" "Don't ask," she said softly, withdrawing almost reluctantly, the eerie heat lingering where her palm had rested. "It's not something I can explain." But it was impossible to ignore the pull that had rooted her fingers to flesh, the quiet hum of something alive and potent between them, like an invisible thread bound to the Alpha King himself. And when her eyes found Kaelin's across the shadowed hall, she saw the flicker of something unspoken in his icy gaze. There was curiosity now, sharpened by a cautious gleam that neither his royal command nor the beast's hungry rumble could fully suppress. He watched her, always watching, his posture impossible to read, or the restless stirring of an ancient hunger clawing beneath the surface of his control, the faint scar along his brow bruised with tension as the beast growled a silent warning Kaelin to stay distant, but he did not pull back. Something fragile and terrifying held him just the same. Leora clenched her fists beneath her sleeves, refusing the pity she sensed hovering like a shadow just beyond the edges of their encounters. She needed to be stronger than their doubts, more than the whispered rumors that branded her reliability. "I am not a thing to be coddled," she told herself, voice steady even when the shivering unknown gripped at her chest. "I am not weak." Her insistence painted sharper lines across the Alpha King's guarded interest, as if her nerves were the only truthful thing piercing the polished veneer of court intrigue. And though the beast snarled beneath his skin, uneasy with the fragile allegiance forming, a part of Kaelin felt drawn closer, as if her very defiance stoked a fire he had long buried under duty and scars. Weeks slipped by in this tense dance of proximity and silence. Leora learned the rhythms of the court, the unspoken codes folded beneath Kaelin's commands. She moved through the tapestry of his world, a mosaic of steel, shadows, and subterfuge, with cautious resilience, wary of slipping and shattering the fragile truce they had forged until the shadow fractured. News came in the quiet, grim whispers of messengers from distant halls no one dared name aloud. A rival faction had mobilized against Kaelin's iron grasp. ready to strike at the heart of the court. The threat was no subtle dagger in the dark, but a relentless tide of ambition and bloodlust that left no room for hesitation. The tension snapped taut in the great hall where the lords and commanders gathered, but Leora noticed one thing above all: Kaelin's fury, smouldering and raw beneath his polished mask. He looked to her then, standing at the edge of the council, unbowed and steady, despite the storm that bristled in the air. "Stay close," Kaelin murmured after the meeting, low enough that only she could hear, his voice a thread of command, and something gentler, more fragile. Muscles tense, but heart resolute. "I am not afraid." The confidence in her voice startled more than a few of the king's closest allies, but to Kaelin it was the quiet flame of quiet defiance, a spark forged from exile and raw edges, igniting something fierce and unexpected within him. When the enemy struck under the cloak of night, their assault was brutal and swift. The clash of steel rang through the stone corridors, screams braided with the roar of the Alpha King's pack as they fought to defend their domain. Shadows twisted and stretched like living things, and Leora found herself in the thick of it, her breath steady, her hands stained with both grit and warmth. She moved with a precision born of desperate necessity, her gift rippling stronger, as if Kaelin's nearness fed the wild pulse within her. Her touch-bound wounds, as they opened, whispered healing, seeping from her veins like a balm that curdled darkness itself. Soldiers whose eyes had once doubted her now looked to her with something closer to awe and fear. During a fierce skirmish at the eastern gate, she locked eyes with one of the enemy's champions, an embittered man twisted with fury and contempt. His blade gleamed under the torchlight, but Leora's stance remained calm, unmoving like the still eye of a storm. "You have no claim here, exile," he spat as he lunged. "You're nothing but a curse cloaked in shadows." She didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered, her voice a low certainty that rippled over the chaos. "My curse will be your undoing." Their blades collided in a shower of sparks, but she held firm, parrying, not just with steel, but with the unyielding courage seeping from her core. When she found an opening, she pressed her palm briefly to his forearm as their weapons parted, not to strike, but to soothe the burning ache of a wound he refused to acknowledge. The effect was instant and disarming. His arrogance cracked, confusion flooding his eyes. The wild beast guarding Kaelin's soul stirred uneasily at this defiance, growling beneath the surface, unsettled by a quiet strength that neither fought nor fled. Kaelin came to her side amidst the tumult, his presence a towering shield. "You stand with us," he said, voice low and fierce. She met him squarely, unbroken, unyielding. "Not with you." "With myself." That calm declaration sliced through the tension between them like a sharpened blade, raising the hackles of his pack, but folding something fragile and precious into the spaces between their guarded gazes. In the chaos, enemies faltered, not against brute force, but against the fierce certainty of a woman who had been cast out and refused to be broken. After the battle, as the first light bled into the sky, the court's silence was weighed down by exhaustion and unspoken questions. Kaelin caught her in the quiet moments before the morning council, his eyes dark with unresolved conflict. "You change everything," he said finally, his voice a growl edged with something raw and unspoken. "Your strength unnerves the beast, yet it's the only thing that keeps it tethered." Leora's breath hitched at the confession she hadn't dared expect. The admission that the wild, roaring creature inside the king needed her as much as she feared it. "I didn't come here to be tamed," she whispered. "I came to survive." Kaelin's gaze softened for a breath. The fierce protector, momentarily giving way to something like reckoning. Survival is not enough, not for either of us. But perhaps, together, his voice trailed off. The promise of fragile thread spun from shattered pride and whispered truths hanging between them. In those silent beats of dawn, with the war still echoed in bruises and broken stone, Leora and the Alpha King stood at a crossroads, two fractured souls bound by shadow and flame, staring down the uncertain path where power, trust, and defiance swirled into something neither could name. And beneath the surface, the beast, a creature of endless hunger and fierce loyalty, growled low, torn between its instinct to claim and protect, cradling the quiet defiance that had so unexpectedly drawn it out from shadow. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows on the cold stone walls as Leora traced the worn edges of the hidden letter, her fingers trembling despite the careful steadiness she forced upon herself. Each word, each carefully scribed line she pulled from the depths of the court's concealed archives, unraveled a cruel knot she hadn't dared to see before. The betrayal was not a random act of cruelty from some distant foe or faceless enemy. It was meticulously designed, orchestrated by someone who wore the court's colors as proudly as the king himself. It was Darian, Kaelin's closest advisor, the man whose counsel bore the weight of years beside the throne, whose sharp eyes seemed to cut through every whisper and shadow alike. The letter was not addressed to some foreign power or enemy of the court. It was a confession, a ledger of secrets darker than Leora could have imagined, and damning beyond all reason. Darian had framed her, feeding the lie of her curse, crafting a story so poisonous that exile was the only outcome. Leora's heart hammered in her chest, a fierce tempest of anger, disbelief, and brittle fragments of hurt. All these months she had lived in the narrow edge of suspicion, survival sharpened to a razor's point, and yet the pain of this truth was more raw than any lash of the past. It was a betrayal deeper than exile, betrayal of trust, of the fragile hope she had let herself cling to. When Kaelin's eyes first softened with something almost like understanding. Holding the letter tightly, the dark ink burning in her palm, she sought the throne chamber. The corridors felt colder than ever, the air thick with the unspoken tensions of a court that dealt, not in truth, but in shadows and unyielding power plays. Her footsteps echoed like warnings, but with every step forward, her resolve hardened. She owed Kaelin the truth. The Alpha King deserved nothing less. Kaelin stood by the great window, the first slivers of sunlight burning away the night. His profile was carved from stone, unyielding, unbreakable, yet the shadows beneath his piercing eyes betrayed lines etched deep by sleepless nights, and battles fought both without and within. Leora entered without fanfare, but with the weight of the confession heavy on her tongue. "Kaelin," she said, quietly, voice steady, despite the storm churning inside her. "You need to know." She pressed the letter into his hand. "He's the reason I was cast out. He hid a secret so dark it would have destroyed us all, and to keep it buried, he destroyed me." Kaelin's eyes widened, disbelief flickering for the briefest instant before a cold fury took hold. The faint scar over his left brow seemed to twitch, the muscle tightening as if the pain was physical. He crushed the letter in his hand, his knuckles ghost pale beneath the skin. "Darian," Kaelin growled, voice low and sharp as the icy wind whipping against the stone. "I trusted him. I trusted him above all." The confession was a bitter taste on his tongue, a wound half-healed, ripping open anew. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Leora's gaze dropped for a moment, the vulnerability she usually kept locked away slipping through. "Because I thought I was the curse, that if I told you I would lose everything." Her voice cracked just so. quiet intensity in her gaze burning brighter as she met his eyes again. "But what I found in those hidden papers isn't just my past. It's a threat to this kingdom, to you. Darian's secret is still alive, and it endangers all of us." Kaelin's jaw clenched, the beast stirring somewhere beneath the surface of his calm, a low growl rumbling in his chest like a warning. The weight of his crown felt heavier suddenly, not just as a ruler, but as a man who had failed to see the betrayal festering so close. "We will face it," he said with fierce certainty, the Alpha King reclaiming his authority. "Together. You did not survive to be discarded again. Leora, your fight is our fight." She nodded, the fragile bond between them deepening in the silent acknowledgement of scars shared and the battle yet to come. The walls they had so cautiously lowered now cracked wider, revealing the possibility of trust, fragile but insistent. The days that followed churned with tension, a storm beneath the cold exterior of courtly decorum. Darian had vanished, his absence leaving a gnawing void and whispered murmurs that stoked the fires of suspicion, but it was Kaelin who changed most profoundly. His aura, once fiercely guarded, cracked like ice under pressure, his beast rising more frequently, its growls a soft rumble of warning whenever Leora crossed his path. One evening, under a sky heavy with stars and threat alike, Kaelin called Leora away from prying eyes to the garden where ancient oaks stood sentry. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wild jasmine, a rare sanctuary amid the suffocating politics of the court. They stood in silence, the unspoken dialogue between them more potent than words. The beast, a massive shadow of raw power and primal instinct, shifted low at Kaelin's feet, but did not retreat. Instead, it curled protectively around Leora, its presence a silent declaration. The thrum of its heartbeat, felt through the ground and skin, filled the space between them with an electric promise. Kaelin's voice was a low growl, rough and tinged with vulnerability he had rarely allowed himself to reveal. "It doesn't like being kept in the dark." He glanced at Leora, eyes dark and conflicted beneath the weight of his scar and the beast's restless stirrings. "You," his words faltered before he could twist them into something less raw. "You are not like the others." Leora felt the fierce, wild creature nestle close, its warmth a strange comfort against the chill of years spent alone and hunted. "I don't want to be tamed," she whispered, echoing the word she had spoken to him before. "But maybe," her voice softened, a thread of hope tugging free, "maybe I don't have to be alone in this fight anymore." Kaelin's expression shifted, pride and vulnerability warring in his gaze. The armor of an alpha was not worn lightly, but in that moment it cracked to reveal a man who longed for more than command and distance. "Together," he said, the word a vow and a confession, but not just as ruler and exile. As equals. Their hands found each other in the dark, fingers curling with silent promise. The beast shifted once more, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground and into their bones. A guardian, a claim, a bond forged not by chains, but by fierce loyalty and the quiet courage of two souls. In the moments away from the ever-watchful eyes of the court, between whispered truths and guarded touches, Leora and Kaelin drew closer. The fragile dance of pride and need unfolded in the spaces where fear often took root, carving new rhythms of trust and desire. Each breath, each glance, each tentative step toward one another was a battleground and a sanctuary all at once. Leora's emerald eyes caught the flicker of starlight, reflecting off Kaelin's ice-blue gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a pact born of defiance and flame. The Alpha King's beast stirred more softly now, seeming to ease its grip in quiet surrender, as if in recognition that what it had guarded so fiercely was no longer a captive, but a chosen. And in the hush of night, beneath the ancient oaks and the weight of unseen eyes, two fractured souls began to knit themselves whole, not by breaking the other, but by leaning into the quiet power of being truly seen. The great hall was suffused with a cold, brittle air the moment Leora stepped across its threshold. The carved stone pillars loomed like silent judges, their faces worn smooth by centuries of whispered accusations and shifting loyalties. The once familiar murmurs of the court had turned to a hush, a brittle silence pregnant with expectation and dread. Leora's footsteps echoed deliberate, measured against the polished floor, each step a rejection of the exile she had been forced to endure, each breath a quiet claim on the power denied her for so long. Before her, seated on high dais, the nobles of the court gathered like vultures circling unseen prey. Faces once indifferent or hostile, now twisted with surprise at her return, and beneath their composed masks lay the sharp edges of fear, suspicion, and something darker still, resentment. They had cast her out, branded her a curse, a danger to their fragile order, but here she stood, unbroken, unbowed, and utterly resolute. A murmur rippled through the hall, but it was the beast that answered first. From the shadows behind her, a ripple of movement stirred. Kaelin's beast, the indomitable force that had long guarded the Alpha King's throne, now shifted forward with a presence like thunder on stone. It was no longer a shadowed terror skulking at the edges of perception, but a breathtaking living symbol of raw power and allegiance. Its fur shimmered in the muted torchlight, muscles rippling beneath the sleek surface as it exhaled smoke and doom in a low resonant growl that vibrated through the floor, the walls, and the very air itself. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Leora's gaze swept the assembly, and she met the eyes of each accuser with a fierceness that ignited the stillness. They saw not the frightened woman they had condemned, not the fragile outcast they had dismissed, but a force shaped in exile and tempered by fire. "You called me a curse," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering, the edges sharpened by years of solitude and secret torment. "And I lived with that, bearing it like a wound that never fully healed." Her emerald eyes did not waver as they locked with the cold, calculating eyes of the court. "But you did not know what you feared. You did not see what I have become." From the depths of her being, a swelling current of power, the quiet defiance that had protected her in shadow, rose in a shimmer of iridescent light that danced faintly about her fingertips. The flame that whispered in her veins pulsed softly, a testament to all she had endured and the truths they had tried to bury beneath slander and silence. The nobles shifted uneasily, watching the air thicken with something not quite seen but deeply felt. The beast stepped forward, its massive head tilting as it released a low, mournful howl that shattered the silence like steel on stone, a declaration of loyalty that shattered the old lies like fragile glass. The sound echoed with authority, a primal chord that resonated with truth and submission alike. It was a roar not born from fury, but from protective devotion, a herald that the Alpha King's guard now belonged, not to shadows or fear, but to the woman facing them in unyielding light. Kaelin's voice, calm and commanding, carried across the hall. "You see her now for what she is." His tone was neither apology nor challenge, but a settled prophecy, something irrevocable and sovereign. "Leora is no exile. She stands beside me as my equal, as the keeper of a power you have failed to understand." Whispers fluttered like brittle dead leaves, but beneath them lay a new undercurrent, a cautious respect, the first tremors of reckoning. Leora breathed in slowly, feeling the rare warmth of vindication fill her chest until it almost burst. The beast pressed closer to her, a towering guardian whose loyalty burnt brighter than any doubt or shame. Her eyes blazed as she addressed the court once more, each word a blade honed by hardship. We are not all falsehoods and shadows, not all who bear the weight of secrets are broken. I ask this court to remember, strength is born not from acceptance alone, but from defiance and the will to be seen when no one else will look. A sudden stillness fell, and in it lay the future, fragile, wild, and utterly hers to claim. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating and merciless, as footsteps echoed sharply. Too many, too close. Leora's breath hitched with the tightening coil of danger wound deep in her chest. They had been forced to trust before, but now trust was not a choice, it was survival drawn in high relief. Behind her, Kaylin's presence was a steady heartbeat, thrum-steady and fierce. Their conversation was wordless, a ballet of glances and gestures honed by whispered nights and shared shadows. In the blackness between them, their silent communion was a language older than spoken promises. "Left," she mouthed, barely moving her lips. Kaylin pivoted with a fluid grace towering form, melding with the midnight gloom as they advanced like twin storms descending upon their prey. The assailants emerged suddenly, figures armed with cruel blades and vipers' intent. Steel drawn, eyes wild with hate. But between Leora and Kaylin, a force had been forged stronger than any blade or betrayal. Leora's hand surged forward, a pulse of shimmering power crackling like thunder through the air, slowing her attacker's movements, bending the shadows to her will. At her side, Kaylin's beast erupted from the dark, snarling with primal fury, a living tempest of muscle and teeth. The beast's howl tore through the air, a sound both chilling and exultant, riding the waves of fear like a warrior's war cry. In that furious unity, they became unstoppable. Kaylin's movements were a blur of precise strength, his scarred brow furrowing with fierce focus as he blocked, struck, and parried with the rhythm of a man who had lived entire lifetimes in battles much like this. Leora, light and fierce, wove between foes with the grace of wind and flame, her power now untethered, wild and terrifyingly beautiful. One attacker lunged at her, blade flashing, a strike meant to end. Time slowed, heart pounding inside her veins like a war drum. Kaylin's hand shot out, fingers curling into steel around the assailant's wrist, yanking the arm aside with savage force. The beast lunged, too, a shadow made flesh and fury, teeth sinking into an ankle as the attacker crumpled. Together, Kaylin breathed, a single word carried on the surge of adrenaline and trust, and Leora answered with flame born in exile. Side by side, they moved in perfect unison, two halves of a single lethal force, bound by more than blood or title, but by a shared struggle that had burned away doubt and forged defiance into armor. Breath ragged, muscles burning, they drove their enemies back. Step by grinding step, the alley became a crucible, echoing with every clash of steel and heartbeat. Leora's eyes never left Kaylin's the ice blue meeting, emerald in a promise, sealed not with words but with unspoken truth. When the last of their foes fled into the darkness, broken beneath the weight of their combined will, the king's beast lifted its head, howling victory into the night, a sound not only of conquest but of union. The cry was a tempest that cracked open the silence and carried the echo of healing and strength born from shared danger. Leora's chest heaved, heart still pounding with raw life, as Kaylin's hand found hers once again, rough and firm in the aftermath. The distance between them contracted into nothingness, their eyes reflecting a storm calmed, and a bond rewritten by fire and shadow. "You were magnificent," Kaelin murmured, voice thick with something unnamed but fierce. "You were my anchor," she whispered back, the tension of the fight melting into the quiet intimacy of survival. Around them, the city bore witness to a truth that no blade or shadow could ever undo, that strength was no longer an isolated flame, but a wildfire forged in trust, defiance, and the quiet power of being seen in the darkest of places. Beneath the ancient stones and whispered threats, Leora and Kaelin stood as one, an unbreakable force tempered by pain and promise, ready to face whatever shadows still lingered beyond the edge of dawn. The air hung heavy with the remnants of battle smoke, curling from scorched stone, and the faint metallic tang of blood mingling with dust and damp earth. Leora's breath was steady now, her racing heart slowed by the stillness that followed the storm of combat. Yet beneath the quiet that settled across the ruined courtyard, something deeper stirred, a restless stirring, not of flesh and bone, but of forgotten spirits entangled beneath their feet. Kaelin's gaze remained locked on her, ice-blue eyes sharp and searching, as if trying to unearth a labyrinth of secrets she had yet to reveal. The tension between them, forged in fire and unyielding defiance, tightened for a moment, until Leora finally moved. She let go of his hand with a soft sigh, stepping forward toward the fractured stone. Closing her eyes, Leora lowered herself into a kneel, fingers sifting through the cracked earth, as if trying to read the whispers buried below. The world hushed around her, the distant city's murmur fading into a breathless lullaby. She could feel them, silent, aching threads of unsettled souls, trapped beneath the layers of rock and ruin, desperate for release, for peace. With a slow, deliberate focus, she stretched out her senses, summoning the hidden wellspring of her power that had always been deemed a curse by those who feared the unknown. The cool shard of moonlight that snuck through the broken battlements pooled on her fingertips, and beneath her touch the restless spirits began to stir, fragile tendrils of energy weaving up through the earth like fragile silver smoke. Kaelin's sharp breath caught, his form rigid as he watched the delicate dance unfolding before him. The fierce beast within him, the untamed shadow that clung to his mark of alpha, stirred uneasily in response to this quiet magic, this opposing force that promised to heal rather than destroy. Leora's voice rose, low and unwavering, a thread of sound that wove through the night like a balm. "They don't want to harm us," she whispered. "They only want to be remembered, freed from the pain that traps their souls here." Her words fell upon the raw wound of the earth. Slowly, the jagged edges of anger and fear dissolved, replaced by a tranquil calm that radiated outward, touching every corner of the broken court, and, slowly, the ragged beast twitching beside Kaelin's feet. Its snarls softened until a low, mournful whimper escaped its throat, a sound so fragile and human it split open something buried deep within the Alpha King. Kaelin knelt beside her, then his hand hovering uncertainly, before settling gently on her shoulder. "I never imagined." His voice was a rough edge of disbelief, the years of solitude, rage and mistrust cracking just enough for awe to seep in. "That it could be this." Leora's eyes opened, gleaming emerald-veined with quiet fire. She reached out, brushing a stray lock of raven-black hair from his brow, where the faint scar still marked a past both brutal and unyielding. "There's strength in healing," she said softly, "in mending what the world tries to tear apart. Not all of us are made for war." The beast beside them shifted, the tension in its muscles uncoiling, as the last tendrils of unrest settled beneath the surface of the night. In that fragile silence, Kaelin saw more than just a gifted exile. he saw a woman whose quiet defiance was not born of rebellion alone, but of a deep compassion that challenged even the darkest corners of his soul. The storm that lived inside him, powerful and fierce, bent toward her, drawn not to her fire, but to the steady, unwavering light she carried. Later, when the moon hung heavy and full above the city's battered battlements, Kaelin and Leora stood side by side, their figures etched in silver against the black velvet sky. The winds whispered through the cracked stones, carrying soft echoes of the night's lingering danger, but also a fragile promise of something new. They were no longer just a monarch and an exile. They were two fractured souls standing on the precipice of something neither had dared to name. Kaelin broke the silence first, his voice a low rumble beneath the roar of ancient ghosts. "You carry scars no one else sees." Leora met his gaze evenly, her green eyes steady but shimmering with a vulnerability she scarcely allowed herself to entertain in the daylight. "And you wear your pain like armor, but even iron can rust." Her lips curled in a brief, rueful smile. "I never asked to be caught between worlds of shadow and of light. Sometimes I wonder if I belong to either at all." Kaelin's shoulders tensed, then relaxed beneath the weight of her honesty. "I know the feeling all too well, the exile inside myself, the beast I try not to show, the endless war with who I was expected to be." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with a tentative strength. A gathering of unspoken understanding. "We're both broken," she whispered, "but maybe it's the broken parts that make us whole." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, the fierce cold inside thawing imperceptibly. "I thought I had to conquer everything alone, my cult, my enemies. I think I was wrong." A soft whimper escaped the shadows at their feet, the beast pressing itself closer to them, an unyielding guardian tethered to both their hearts. It was a shared silence, a communion of fracture and healing, guardian and ward, sovereign and exile, all threads woven together beneath the infinite night sky. The night deepened, and for the first time since he had come into his throne, Kaelin allowed his defenses to fall away, revealing not the Alpha King of legend, but the man beneath, the man who needed not a crown of fear, but the fragile warmth of trust and shared strength. Leora leaned into him then, the subtle weight of her presence a balm against years of solitude that had pressed heavily upon him. "We don't have to be the monsters they made us to be," she murmured. "Not when we have each other." His response was a quiet nod, and in that moment, the battlements were no longer a place of war and waiting. They were the fragile beginning of a home neither had dared to dream of, yet one they would build together. Dawn came slow and steady, pale light spilling like silk over the city below. The pack gathered in the great hall, beneath ancient banners faded by time, but not by loyalty. Whispers turned to murmurings, mounting into a reverent silence, as Kaelin and Leora stepped forward, their figures distinct and united. Gone was the exile who had stumbled into shadow, replaced by a woman of quiet resolve, her emerald eyes alight with the fierce calm of one who had faced the abyss and found her own strength within. By her side, the Alpha King stood taller than ever, the weight of his crown and scars no longer a burden, but a testament to the battles that had shaped him. The murmurs grew into a chorus of acceptance, not merely of Kaelin as sovereign, but of the bond that knotted them, a bond forged not just in fire and blood, but in the tenderness of shared wounds and the courage to be seen. Leora lifted her gaze, scanning the pack, who now looked to her, not with suspicion, but with a rekindled hope. Beside her, the beast settled quietly, its formidable presence softened as it pressed against her leg, a silent sentinel, a living symbol of the union between them. Kaelin's voice rang clear and sure, reverberating through the hall as he spoke. We are no longer two divided souls. We are one, stronger, wiser, and bound by a destiny we create together. And in that moment, the past, with all its betrayal and exile, fell away, replaced by a future forged anew, a future where power was tempered by compassion, where loyalty was born of choice rather than fear, and where the Alpha King's beast found rest not in shadow, but in the light of the woman who had drawn it there. Leora's hand found Kaelin's once more, fingers weaving keen together as they faced their people, their hearts beating in unison against the rise of a new dawn, a dawn that promised not just survival, but rebirth. Beneath the watching eyes of their pack, beneath the weight of all that had been lost and all that could be gained, Leora and Kaelin stood as one, no longer exile and king, no longer torment and fury. Their legacy, written in shadow and fire, had only just begun.